Hello, welcome to another episode of The Joy of the Rediscovered album. So, this week we've bounced to 1987. Previously we were at, what was it? In Flames was our previous album. And yeah, that was from 2000. So in this series, if you haven't already gathered or haven't seen the first episode, I'm going to bounce around. It's just going to be one album a year. And it's an album I haven't listened to for a long time. And this one is interesting. Well, the year's interesting generally. So with all of these, it's always a joy to listen to the album again, revisiting an old friend, go through and reacquaint myself with other albums that came out in that time period, in the year that the album came out. And this year is a great year once you start to look at it for other stuff I was listening to. Again, very eclectic, but obviously doing this, going back, like a lot of things, brings back years where you have real bittersweet memories. Now, not that the whole year was a downer, but yeah, it was a tough end of the year, I found. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but in 84, I think it was, 1984, I think early in 84, I went down with what in the UK is referred to as glandular fever. In North America, I think they call it mono. I can never remember its, I should know what it's, what do they call it? Like the scientific term for it, what it is, what species of virus and what subspecies. Although my area of expertise in microbiology was Enterobacteriaceae, which is like gut bacteria. I'm not really an expert in viruses, although I did do some immunology back in the 80s when I was working in diagnostics. Anyway. So yeah, I got sick in 84, and what was interesting, and I don't know if this is something that echoes with anybody else out there, but up until that point, so I was 84, I would have been around about my early 20s, and what I noticed was that it was the first time that something had really affected me in terms of like a virus for such a long period of time. And most of the times when I got any so-called childhood illnesses, colds, flus, it normally affected me for a few days and I bounced back. It was the first time that I didn't bounce back within a few days. A couple of days turned into a week, and I was working at that point in 84. Had been working for 3 years actually, and a few days turned into a week, and then 2 weeks, and I still felt ill. And as I wasn't used to, I just went back to work, thinking, "Oh, I'll shake this off," and and I just felt so drained for so long. And it also brought home to me how big differences there are with people when you catch so seemingly, innocuous viruses, or viruses that most people don't seem to affect people. Up to that point, I'd always assume this usual thing is, say for instance, if you get something like the flu, generally flu's more serious for the elderly than it is younger people. When I got glandular fever, it became apparent to me that although most people didn't seem to be affected by it, some people did get affected really badly. And it was only through chatting to people that I met later in life who subsequently went on to develop ME, or just had glandular fever and it really hit them badly, and say, they took them a while to recover. And so what happened was, it took me about a year from when I got it in 84 into 85, and I was really growing great guns and felt really good. And then get into 87, and then into the sort of fall of 87 in autumn in the UK, and I think I'd overdid it. I'd sort of pushed myself too much, because I was feeling so great after feeling so lousy, and I felt lousy again. Not quite as bad, but still. And that went on for about 6 months, on and off, before I started again. It's with those sort of that virus. Can be quite a long recovery. And even today, I still get, tired a lot easier, I think, as a result of it, from way back. And, so it was an interesting, but not experience, but not one I really want to repeat. So I always associate 87 with that relapse, which, like I said, lasted for about 6 months from 87 into 88, and then a bit of recovery. So when I'm going through this, I always have sort of little flashbacks to that period. But either side of that was fantastic. So for the vast majority of 87, I felt pretty good, and definitely seeing these again really bring a smile to my face. So it's still worth it going through. And I'm not going to deliberately sort of skip years because I had a bit of a inclement year for a particular album that's covered. So let us, after that rather long preamble, let's have a look through. So what we got here? Let's see what's on the album, shall we? See the track listings. Looks like they've reissued it a few times. Guns in the Sky, New Sensational, Devil Inside, Need You Tonight, Mediate, The Loved Ones, Wildlife, Never Tear Us Apart, Mystify, Kick, Calling All Nations, Tiny Daggers. So I just finished listening through to it a couple of days ago again, and as I listened through, the tracks that I most remember are New Sensation, Devil Inside, Need You Tonight, Never Tear Us Apart. I did remember Mediate, but the rest of it was almost like listening to new tracks again. I mean, I recognise them, like, where is it, Guns in the Sky, for instance. But, these ones, funnily enough, not surprisingly, the ones that were singles were the ones that, I straight away recognised as being from the album. And if I'd played it blind, then those are the ones that I would say, they were actually on that album. Didn't listen to much INXS outside of this, so it was that 1 year of love with INXS. Didn't buy anything after it, and I don't think I bought anything before it, but their history before it is really interesting, and there's a bit of another personal story behind this, in that a friend of mine who I'd gone to school with since, I was really probably junior school actually, that lived in Forest Row, which is the village that I lived in at the time. And what happened was, after both of us left school, so I left school in 81, he would have left school I think in 1980, and around that time in the UK, unemployment was really high, and a lot of my friends that left at that point ended up on youth training schemes. I was lucky enough to get a job after school, and that's when I started working in a lab that was specialised in microbiology, specifically diagnostic kits, and stayed there for I think, was it 12 years in the end? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, 12 years from 81 through to 93. And what was interesting is that this friend decided not to stick around in the UK, and got this job, I suppose, teaching tennis in, of all places, Australia. So he went out to Australia, and at that point, I think going out to Australia was a lot easier than it is now. I do remember there were certain requirements. I know when friends of mine subsequently visited Australia, they had to have a sort of certain amount of savings, even just to visit there for like an extended period of time. I used to have another friend who was professional cyclist who used to go out to Australia for a couple of years, went out there for an extended period for tax reasons related to tax in the UK. And I think, if I'm right, because I can remember going to London with him to get visas, get a visa to stay out there. And so I've had, you know, two friends, I suppose, that have spent extended periods of time in Australia beyond just going out for, say, a week or two. But the first friend I was mentioning, who went out there after they left school to teach tennis, actually stayed out there for a couple of years. I think it's at least a couple of years. And by this period in 87, they'd come back. And I remember when I first bumped into them when they came back, I couldn't believe how strong their Australian accent was. It sounded to me like they, you know, were born out there, and then eventually it wore off. But yeah, they came back with this really strong Aussie accent. But the other thing, and why I think about it, is that they, prior to 87, and they came back quite a while before 87, they kept on about this band INXS, just incessantly about, and they knew I was into music, and they were a big music fan as well, and it was through them that I got into bands like the Dead Kennedys and a lot of punk stuff as well. But yeah, they'd really got into INXS. And so when I finally picked up Kick and was telling about it, they said, yeah, I've been talking to you about this for forever, about how good this band are. And then you realise that, you know, there's all these other albums that you hadn't checked out. I think I eventually did own Listen Like Thieves, which, you know, that was their fifth album. So Kick, which was the one that really seemed to break them big in the UK and had the biggest impact, at least through my lens, was this album. But then beyond that, didn't buy anything else. That was it. That was my one period of being totally into INXS. But yeah, I bought this album on cassette in 87, pretty much when it came out, because there'd already been some singles around that time which locked me into the band. I think my middle brother had a copy of it probably as well, so I was hearing it. At that point he'd also started work, so when I was sort of driving around with him, he'd be playing the album as well. So yeah, it was on the radio all the time, on the car stereo. I think another friend, actually my professional cyclist friend, had a copy as well, and he was playing it. Another group of friends that I was hanging out with as well also were playing it as well. And so yeah, that was an interesting sort of intensity of a band at a certain point in time. There was also a live gig played on British TV that they showed as well, and the album was also on a jukebox to a pub me and a mate used to go to before we went to band rehearsals in 88, 89. So I was hearing odd tracks there as well. Now I was curious about what similar artists would come up on Last FM. So you got Icehouse, Midnight Oil. So that's probably the biggest effect the band had, is it made me aware of Midnight Oil. And so yeah, I started listening to them. And also it's interesting connections here on Last FM for similar artists between them and bands like Simple Minds, Duran Duran, Power Station. There's other Australian bands like Cold Chisel, Crowded House, and then also bands like U2. And it's interesting because a couple of friends that were big into U2 also really liked INXS as well. I was curious because I was listening to a lot of hard rock metal at that time, what I was actually listening to, what was competing for my attention. And I was looking through here and trying to think like what albums did I buy when they came out, and so I like to use, it's always handy to use the Kerrang albums of the year, just albums of the year as a sort of structure to do this. Although I wasn't reading this at this point in time, but I can see here, yeah, I bought that when it came out, Whitesnake 1987, Anthrax's Among the Living, Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, this, which I have on vinyl, this is cool, Hysteria by Def Leppard. I had been listening to Celtic Frost around the time of To Megatherion, but didn't buy this when it came out. I was delayed by about a year, but I do own this Into the Pandemonium. Yep, U2 Joshua Tree bought that when it came out. Yeah, it took me a while to get into Halloween. Didn't catch up with them until probably, I don't know, the early 90s maybe. And I bought, Keeper of the Seven Keys, Keeper of the Seven Keys, Part 1 and 2. Sometime in the early 90s. I bought this this is like a Rush album that I bought just not alongside any other Rush album. So I'd been systematically buying Rush all the way up to around 81, 82, and then didn't buy anything by them, and then suddenly bought this album, Hold Your Fire. And Faster Pussycat were around, and this album got released. Didn't buy it at the time, even though I'd bought Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, but really got into this band as a result of quite later, so that would have been in the 90s, of seeing on TV the Decline of Western Civilization, the Civilization Part 2, which they feature on quite heavily in that, because one of the members of the band and an associate of the band owned a nightclub. So yeah, I'm going to just look around this period. I'm not going to go all the way through Wikipedia for this year in music, but just around the time it came out. See what else bubbles to the surface. So straight away I can see albums that I actually bought around when they came out. This is a period in my life where I was literally buying an album a week. So I was really keeping up with, releases, probably more than an album in a week. On cassette, because I had a car at that point. And cassettes were my sort of go-to medium. So yeah, just looking through here, just in October, I bought that. This around the time it came out. Didn't buy this until several years later. Didn't really get into Belinda Carlisle until the time of, I don't know what, Runaway Horses, that period. Bought that when it came out. I was a big Exodus fan at the time. It was interesting because there was a lot of bands like Exodus who'd been around, with the original, big four of thrash. And if you look, in terms of what everybody else was releasing, so 88, which was the following year, was when South of Heaven and Injustice for All came out. So Metallica and Slayer up to 87 were already, 3 albums in. So Exodus were 2 in. And this was the album that the first Exodus album that I bought, and because prior to that I'd already started buying Metallica stuff and Slayer. And so you can see here his Kick, and then Surfing with the Alien. So my professional cycling friend got me into Joe Satriani, because when he came back, and I didn't start to listen to this until a little bit later, although I was aware of some of the tracks because they played it on the Friday Rock Show. He was playing Surfing with the Alien in the car all the time. So I did end up buying that. Bought this a little bit later, Pop Will Eat Itself, Box Frenzy. It's got the track Gribo Guru on there, amongst others. I know my youngest brother was playing a lot of Soundgarden, although not this album, I don't think. Oh, Nightfall by Candlemass. Yeah, I remember that album, although I think I bought it just a little bit. Yeah, I didn't get into them until just after Ancient Dreams, I don't think. Oh, this, bought when it came out. Because I'd seen the Sisters of Mercy in 85. So the other thing that's quite important for this is 87, I was still going to a lot of gigs in Brighton, and I just pulled out my my records of my gigs from that year. And 87, I saw the Psychedelic Furs, the Cult. So the Cult, that was around the time of the third album, which will actually come up here. Spirit of Destiny, with the Bolshoi supporting. Bolshoi, a really good band. The Alarm for the second time, who I'd seen in 85, and the Pretenders, also in 87. So yeah, it was some good. And that was the last gig I went to for quite a while, until quite a bit later, really, because after 87 I started going to a lot more local gigs at pubs and things, at the Shelley Arms in Nutley and the 101 Club in East Grinstead and various other places. So I sort of shifted from more national and international bands to like local bands, and also some other bands that were starting to build a following, and other ones that had come off of building a following. So I remember seeing UK Subs at the Shelley Arms sometime in the 80s, I think, and a whole load of other bands as well. I think I saw Nick Van Eede before, when he was in a band called Nick Van Eede and the Drivers, before he went on to be in the Cutting Crew. So yeah, it's fond memories of that. So yeah, so going into December, there was that I'm the Man EP by Anthrax. I'm trying to remember, because I'd bought Among the Living, which I think came out a little bit earlier in the year. This was also reissued again, I think. Yeah, I bought it in 85. So that was, memories of that. And then what else do we have? Just in front of there. Oh, Crazy Nights by Kiss. Yeah, I do remember that. Crazy Nights. That funny beeping you just heard was, I'd just been filming and I'd accidentally I left my camera on, so we might as well have that, warts and all. And there's Hold Your Fire. Wow. But anyway, let's go through here and just look at British music generally. So I was watching through, actually, in preparation for this, a little one of those sort of Top of the Pops reviews from 1987, and this came up, Pump Up the Volume. I remember this being a real big hit, and Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody. There's a lot of synth pop around in the UK at that point. Pet Shop Boys were doing really well. Erasure was doing really well. Stock Aitken and Waterman were really big as producers, and so there's Bananarama. They were involved with Mel and Kim's Respectable, and of course Rick Astley, who has staged a bit of resurgence recently when he appeared at Glastonbury, and he's also been doing a tour doing Smith's covers. I've actually watched some of that, and it's really impressive. I mean, he sounds like Rick Astley, but the band just not that that's a bad thing necessarily, but he doesn't attempt to sound like Morrissey. But his backing band have really nailed it. Yeah, they really are able to sort of reproduce the sound of Smith's tracks really well. Okay, yep, True Blue. Because Bad was a big album from that year. And then we had that big hit, the Christmas song with the Pogues and Kirsty MacColl, Fairy Tale of New York. So again, just to orientate yourself in terms of, this is what through my UK music lens I was seeing, very much as being, the popular music world in the popular music world in the UK, alongside my sort of hard rock, heavy metal lens. So speaking of hard rock and heavy metal, let's just have a look. Alongside the albums I've already mentioned. There's Among the Living. I bought that when it came out. Some stuff I didn't buy till later, sort of retrospectively, like Bathory. I wasn't really following them. This Testament album, Black Sabbath, I wasn't really keeping up with. I mean, this was a iteration. I don't even know. I mean, obviously, Tony Iommi was playing on this, but beyond that, I couldn't tell you if Geezer Butler was on the album or not, even though I do own this. But I didn't buy it till the 2000s. But this, I really loved this album, Faith No More, Introduce Yourself. So the album was with the original singer. And I had this on cassette, and then the album before it on vinyl. Oh yeah, this Killing Technology. And then other stuff I infilled later, like Sarcophago, as I mentioned, Into the Pandemonium. Bought this when it came out. This a little bit later. But you can see, I remember buying that when it came. No, I didn't buy that when it came out, because that was the next album, or next band that my friend that's now an ex-pro cyclist got me into, which was White Lion. But the album after this, is it Big Game, I think it's called? Maybe, yeah. That one. So I infill with them. This is an early Marty Friedman album with Jason Becker. And I was also aware of the album, the band before this, which is a band called, was it Hawaii? No, I'm not sure. He had another band which also shared a name with another metal band, and I'm just trying to remember whether it was Hawaii or not. Whether both bands were called Hawaii. Racer X, hadn't really got into them until later. I wasn't aware of the band. At that point, I suppose I was listening to a lot of still listening to like all the big four of thrash, what other albums had just come out before that, but then all the sort of almost like the second wave stuff that was coming out in that style, or some bands were getting slightly more technical in that area, and also there was a lot of sort of German thrash that I was being exposed to, like bands like Creator as well. So yeah, so it was all sort of a mixing part of me listening to Guns N' Roses, Def Leppard, and Anthrax. Hadn't got into death metal at that point. So alongside all of that stuff, then also quite a bit of pop stuff as well. So, and rock. So listening to things like, I was big into U2 at that point. I remember this coming out, although I didn't buy it. Oops. Oh, I hate that ad. There we go. are we? I did buy that when it came out, and that. Yeah, I mentioned about Sisters of Mercy. There's INXS. There was a big single, was it? I Got My Mind Set on You. Yeah, yes, I had Big Generator out. This album, I remember buying this not long after it came out. So this was, to me, a start of the return to form for Aerosmith. And then the following album, Pump, they really knocked it out of the park. Oh yeah, I remember buying that. So you can see it, and this, and this, and this, and this. Yeah, I was busy buying stuff that year. I looked through here actually just prior to doing this episode, and I don't think I was listening to much punk. I was trying to think of the first time I started to listen to the Subhumans, and I'm not sure when it was. Yeah, there's nothing here I remember listening to. Yeah. Meanwhile, synth pop, yeah, I had this when it came out, this. Yeah, of all the albums, unfortunately, for whatever reason, this reminds me most of being ill at that time, or having a bit of a relapse. Yeah. But it was the point at which I really got into the band and then started to infill. Yeah, really from this point onwards. And I bought that when it came out. I tend to like with pop, synth pop bands, I tend to like the sort of slightly darker bands in terms of like subject material. Yeah, it's true, I think, of a lot of pop bands. That's one of the reasons why I like ABBA so much, is they got real like dark side to them. Oh, alternative rock releases. I thought I'd screen for that as well, because there was going to be some stuff that came up here that wouldn't have been in anything else. So the only thing here really is this album. I just remember Jesus and Mary Chain in the UK. The British music press were sort of almost like proposing them as the next big thing. But I never really got a feel for how exactly big they got in that period. But yeah, I sort of bought into it for one album, I think. And the other interesting thing about this period we're in now is, you know, you're getting into the era of in the UK shoegaze, and also from the US, we're starting to see grunge bands coming through, and people becoming aware of them in the UK. And then just looking at the whole year, regardless of genre. So yeah, this was the big album of the year. I really like this album, Sign of the Times. Bizarrely, hadn't really got into the Smiths at that point. I mean, I was listening to them on the jukebox of the local pub, but hadn't really, put my hand in my pocket and put over my cash until at some point, maybe a little whiles after this, not sure, I bought the first album. And then sometime in the 2000, before streaming became a thing, I actually went through and bought all their sort of back catalogue in terms of their studio albums. This is a great album. I didn't own it at the time. I owned a few tracks on compilations, but I remember listening to this again fairly recently, well before I did this episode. this period actually, I did start to listen to some hip hop and rap around this period, and this is, I think, is probably around my favourite era for that genre of music. I haven't really, out of all the genres, it's probably the ones that I've least explored. I mean, there's few exceptions of things like, industrial hip hop and stuff like that. So, musically, some of the sort of harder edge stuff. But this is a great. There's also a NL Cool J album came out around this time as well, and then you got other. I forgot about this. Scum by Napalm Death, classic album. It's funny. The two sides are two different bands almost. I think the common denominator is the same drummer. Apart from that, two different lineups recorded this album. Over a period of time. I didn't really properly become aware of them until the following album. And Dead Can Dance took me a long time to really fully discover this band. Not until one of their compilations. There's a classic album here. It's really cool. And there's this is worth checking out, I think. And you've got things like Abigail by King Diamond. It took me a while to really get into Merciful Fate. I did listen to them really early on. A track called, I think, Doomed by the Living Dead, but didn't really get them until a lot later. I think when I started to listen to bands that had been influenced by them, which is often what happens with music. And of course Melvin's Gluey Porch Treatments, which again with the Melvins, didn't really check them out properly until a lot later, and then rather regretted that I hadn't checked them out sooner. There's the old Cool J album that came out that year. And Void Killing Technology. I got a copy of that on vinyl actually. Let's have a look at British films for this year as well. It's always nice to just orientate myself around sort of output that was coming out from British directors and producers. What do I remember? Of course, this Full Metal Jacket. All of this stuff wouldn't have seen at the cinema. I would have seen on video. Of course, Hellraiser was to me the big film from that year. Would probably have been, feeling so ill at the time, wouldn't gone to see that at the cinema. I had actually read the novella Hellbound Heart, but eventually ended up watching this on video sometime in the 90s. I was on a bit of a what would you call it, like horror movie jag, and as a result ended up getting a lot of horror movies on which back then would have been not so much DVD but VHS, things like Reanimator and all sorts of stuff. I'm trying to think now. Films like Deep Red and Suspiria and all these other sort of really famous horror films, where there tended to be a bit of a dial up on the gore. So it's not something that really sticks with me to this day. Actually, I was obviously going through a phase, but again, that was after I had my sort of post-viral relapse. Yeah, I do remember that. Oh, and this with Nell and I, but didn't watch it until years later. If you've not seen it, it's well worth checking out. Not to everybody's taste, but yeah, it's a classic. And then TV. So just it's always interesting to see what was coming to an end in a particular time period. So the Tube had a really good run from 82 to 87. That's one of my favourite music programmes of all time. It was great. It was on a Friday afternoon after I got home from work. I would quickly wolf down my evening meal and watch this until it finished and then go down the pub. It was interesting as well because when I had a bit of a sort of post-viral relapse in 87, that's actually the point at which I quit alcohol for good, and I haven't had a drink since then. So yeah, that was my one of the attempts at just to basically stop feeling so sick and tired. So it's interesting that came to an end of that period. Maybe that was what caused it, as lack of the Tube caused the relapse. We Are the Champions, wow. Old Grey Whistle Test as well. I didn't actually used to watch it that much. Didn't really get into it until probably fairly close to when it stopped being shown. And I remember the episode I really remember would have been around 85, which is where Sisters of Mercy played on there, and the whole studio was just filled with smoke from the fogger when they appeared. The two Ronnies. That was a real favourite in our family. And it was, The Growing Pains of Adrian Mole, which I never really watched. Was this another? Yeah, music-based. So Razzmatazz, I think that was on in the afternoons. But I'm not sure. I think this might have even been... Razzmatazz was the last episode. I'm just trying to think whether it was on Razzmatazz where there was the last appearance of Phil Lynott before he died, but I'm just trying to remember when he died. Yeah, whether it was before then. Sometimes I'm terrible at remembering dates. Let's look that up, shall we? Because that's just formed a memory. Phil Lynott, there we go. So if we have a look here, yeah, so that would have been 85. So yeah, 85. So I don't know if it mentions about him appearing, that as being his last appearance or not. But it says down here, first TV shows. Yeah, it doesn't say. But I think there was an appearance with him and I'm trying to remember the guitarist. Robin somebody. And they appeared on that show, and then literally, I saw them. I'd got home from work, I think, on Christmas Eve of 85, and then by the time we got back to work in the new year, he died over Christmas, and I think that was on Razzmatazz that appearance was. So that also, it's funny how when you see these things, they remind you of certain periods of shows, and then I think, oh yeah, I remember seeing such and such band on that music show, and then that triggers another memory, which is part of the sort of interest of doing this series, and why I wanted to start doing it in the first place, is to try and flag up those interesting musical connections that only seem to come out of the woodpile once you start sort of kicking the woodpile around. So there we have it. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.